Sarah Callahan stood over the crude wooden cross marking her husband's final resting place. Her hands clenched so tightly around Ethan's small shoulders that he whimpered. She loosened her grip immediately, running her fingers through his dust-matted blonde hair, but she could not bring herself to speak. The words felt too heavy, too final. James was gone, and with him, the last shred of certainty in her world. Behind her, the Callahan men shifted impatiently. Paul, James's elder brother, spat into the dirt and adjusted his gun belt. "Ain't no sense in standing here all day," he said, his voice thick with indifference. "The dead don't care for long goodbyes." Sarah turned slowly, meeting his cold blue eyes with defiance. "You act like you've already moved on," she said, her voice raw. "But he was your brother." Paul scoffed. "My brother made his choices, same as you did when you married him. But now he's in the ground, and we got to be practical." Practical. The word made her sick. Her gaze flicked to the others, Jonah, the youngest Callahan, shifting from foot to foot as if he wished to be anywhere else, and their father, Albert Callahan, who had yet to utter a word. He was a man carved from stone, unmoved by grief, unmoved by anything. Paul adjusted his hat, glancing up at the sky as if assessing the time. "We're leaving," he said flatly. Sarah blinked, Ethan gripping her skirts tighter. "Leaving." Paul nodded toward the saddled horses standing by the fence. "We got a long way to go, and we ain't waiting for you to dawdle." Her stomach turned to ice. "You mean to leave me and Ethan behind?" Jonah looked away, guilt flashing across his face, but he said nothing. Paul exhaled sharply. "Look, Sarah, you got no claim to the homestead. My brother married you, yeah, but this land's Callahan land. Always has been. And it sure as hell don't belong to no woman, least of all one who can't pull her own weight." Her chest tightened, the meaning sinking in. She was pregnant, too far along to be of use in the brutal work of farming and survival. That was what this was about. "I can still work," she argued, her voice strained with desperation. "I can still—" "Don't matter," Paul interrupted. "A widow with a child and another on the way? That's dead weight. We ain't got enough to go around, and we sure as hell ain't carrying a burden." Ethan, sensing the rising tension, buried his face against her leg. His small body trembled, and Sarah instinctively wrapped an arm around him. "James would never have allowed this," she whispered, more to herself than to them. Albert Callahan finally spoke, his voice low and grizzled. "James ain't here." The finality in his tone sent a fresh wave of fear through her, but she refused to let them see it. "You can't just abandon us," she said, forcing steel into her voice. "Where will we go? How will we survive?" Paul smirked. "That's your problem." Jonah hesitated before mumbling, "We left you some supplies in the shed." Paul shot him a glare, but Jonah stood firm. It was a small mercy, but it wouldn't be enough. Not nearly. Without another word, Paul turned on his heel, mounting his horse. Albert followed without a backward glance. Jonah lingered for a brief moment, his eyes flickering with something that looked like regret, before he mounted up and rode after them. Sarah watched in stunned silence as they disappeared down the dirt road, leaving nothing but hoof prints in the dust. For the first time since James's death, she felt truly alone. A sharp gust of wind swept across the prairie, cutting through the thin fabric of her dress. The chill had nothing to do with the weather. It was the weight of abandonment, of understanding that no one was coming to save them. Ethan sniffled, rubbing his eyes. "Mama, where do we go now?" She swallowed the lump in her throat, dropping to one knee so she could look him in the eye. "We'll figure it out," she said, forcing a small, shaky smile. "We always do." But as she looked around, the empty stretch of land, the unforgiving horizon, the small, rotting shed that now held their only possessions, she wondered if that was true. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped. Sarah had managed to scavenge a meager pile of supplies from the shed, some dried meat, a water skin half full, and an old rifle James had kept but never used. She cradled it in her lap as she sat near the flickering embers of a dying fire. Ethan curled against her side. The sounds of the night crept in distant howls, the rustling of unseen creatures in the tall grass. Each noise sent her heart hammering, her fingers tightening around the rifle. She wasn't a fool. She knew that alone, they wouldn't last long. Even if she tried to make it to the nearest settlement, the odds were stacked against them. She was heavy with child, and Ethan's small legs couldn't carry him far. A sudden snap of a branch had her heart leaping into her throat. She bolted upright, rifle raised. The fire's dim light cast long shadows, distorting the landscape, but she saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched crept over her like a sickness. Ethan stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Mama," he whispered. "Shush." She hushed him, eyes scanning the darkness. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. And then from somewhere beyond the trees came a gunshot. Sarah's breath hitched. That shot was close. Too close. Fear clawed at her insides, but she fought to keep it at bay. If there were men out there, men with guns, they wouldn't be kind to a lone woman and child. She had to move. Slipping the rifle strap over her shoulder, she scooped Ethan into her arms. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. Ethan didn't question her, only clung tighter as she took off into the night. The prairie was vast and open, too open. She was exposed, vulnerable. Every step felt like an eternity, the darkness pressing in on all sides. Somewhere behind them, another gunshot rang out, followed by distant laughter. It wasn't just a hunter. Someone was out there, watching, hunting. Panic threatened to choke her, but she pressed on, her legs aching, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Then another sound. Hoofbeats. Her blood ran cold. Someone was riding toward them, fast. She didn't think. She ran. The uneven ground was unforgiving, but she pushed forward, Ethan's weight slowing her down. She could hear the rider gaining, the pounding of hooves echoing in her ears. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. Sarah whirled around, rifle raised, bracing for an attack. A lone figure sat atop a horse, just a few yards away. Even in the dark, she could make out his silhouette, broad shoulders, long dark hair, a presence that felt both dangerous and deliberate. A Navajo warrior. He said nothing, merely watched her with dark, assessing eyes. Sarah tightened her grip on the rifle, her voice shaking. "Stay back." The man didn't move, but something in his expression shifted, an understanding, perhaps. Then, from behind her, the rustling of grass. Sarah's breath caught. She turned slightly, just enough to glimpse movement, a second shadow, creeping toward them. She wasn't alone. She was surrounded. Her pulse roared in her ears. The rider remained motionless, watching. And then he spoke. "You run. You die." His voice was quiet, certain. A warning. A choice. Sarah swallowed hard, glancing at Ethan, who clung to her in terror. She had no idea if this man was an ally or another threat. But she did know one thing. Alone, they wouldn't make it through the night. The warrior did not move, nor did he reach for a weapon. His dark eyes studied Sarah, taking in her trembling hands, the defiance that barely concealed the terror in her gaze. The child clung to her skirts, half buried in the folds of fabric, his small body taut with fear. The rifle in her grip wavered, the strain of exhaustion evident in the stiffness of her stance. She was not built for fighting. He had seen their kind before, settlers who strayed too far, who thought the land would bend to their will. Most ended in shallow graves, taken by sickness, hunger, or the cruel hand of men who thrived in lawless places. The woman and her boy were already ghosts in the making. Yet something held him there, watching. Perhaps it was the fire in her stance, the way she shielded her son despite her trembling limbs. Perhaps it was the knowledge that if he left them, they would not last another night. Sarah's fingers tightened around the rifle. "I don't want trouble," she said, voice hoarse from lack of water. The warrior tilted his head slightly. His silence unnerved her more than words might have. He had the air of someone who had no need for threats. His presence alone was enough. His horse shifted beneath him, nostrils flaring as it scented the air. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, the warrior turned his head, listening. Sarah's pulse pounded. Her mouth was dry. What? A sound carried over the wind, the unmistakable shuffle of boots through grass. Not one set. Multiple. She sucked in a sharp breath. The gunshots earlier had not been random. Someone had been hunting, watching, and now they were closing in. The warrior dismounted in one fluid motion, his feet barely making a sound as they met the earth. He moved like a shadow, like something born from the land itself. In a whisper of movement, he lifted a hand toward her. "Come." Sarah stiffened. "I don't even know who you are." The warrior glanced toward the darkness beyond them, his expression impassive. "Your enemies do not care." A chill ran through her. He was right. Whoever was out there was coming for them, not caring if she hesitated, not giving her the luxury of doubt. If she ran, she and Ethan would be found. If she refused to move, she would be killed where she stood. She looked down at her son. Ethan's face was pale, his eyes wide and unblinking. "Mama." Sarah inhaled sharply, gripping his tiny hand. She turned back to the warrior, staring into his unreadable gaze. Then she took his hand. He wasted no time. With a strength that startled her, he hoisted her onto his horse behind the saddle, then lifted Ethan with the ease of someone who had carried children before. Sarah barely had time to clutch at the warrior's shoulders before the horse surged forward, its hooves barely making a sound against the earth. The wind rushed past them, carrying the distant voices of men calling to one another. The warrior did not turn his head, did not flinch. His grip on the reins was sure, his body steady as he guided them into the night. Sarah forced herself to breathe. She had spent years following James's lead, trusting in his decisions, his plans. Now, she was in the hands of a man she did not know, with no certainty of his intent. Ethan buried his face against her. "Where are we going?" he whispered. The warrior answered without looking back. "Away." Sarah swallowed hard. "Away." It was not an answer that should have given comfort, yet she clung to it all the same. They rode hard through the night, the landscape shifting as they moved deeper into unfamiliar territory. The warrior navigated the land as if he had been born from its very soil, weaving between twisted trees and narrow ravines with the precision of someone who knew every route, every stone beneath his horse's hooves. At last, when the sky began to soften from black to the deep indigo of early dawn, he reined the horse to a halt. They had reached a narrow canyon, its walls towering around them, the passage barely wide enough for the horse to pass through. Sarah sagged forward, muscles screaming from exhaustion. The warrior slid from the saddle, his gaze scanning the horizon before turning back to her. "You cannot stay here," he said simply. Sarah blinked, the words barely registering through the haze of fatigue. "I what?" He gestured toward the landscape behind them. "The men who followed will not stop. They know you are weak, that you have no one." Her breath hitched. It was the truth she had been trying to ignore, the reality she had pushed aside in favor of simple survival. She had lost everything: James, the homestead, the safety she had once believed was hers by right. She had no allies, no resources. She was nothing more than prey. The warrior stepped closer. "But you are not dead yet." His words sent a shiver through her. She met his gaze, searching for some hint of cruelty, some sign that he saw her as little more than another burden, as Paul had. Instead, she saw something else entirely: certainty. She tightened her grip on Ethan. "What do you expect me to do?" The warrior reached for the saddle, retrieving a waterskin. He handed it to her before speaking. "Survive." Sarah hesitated only a moment before she took it. The water was warm, but it tasted like salvation. Ethan sipped eagerly beside her, his little hands gripping the skin with all the desperation of a child who had learned too soon what it meant to go without. The warrior watched them in silence before finally speaking again. "I am called Tahani." Sarah wiped her mouth, her throat still raw. "Sarah." She glanced down at Ethan, then back at the warrior. "And this is my son." Tahani nodded, but there was no flicker of surprise in his face. He had already known. The sun had begun its slow ascent over the horizon, casting golden light over the canyon walls. Sarah stared at the land stretching out before them, vast and unforgiving. Somewhere out there, Paul Callahan still breathed. Somewhere, the men who had hunted her still roamed. The danger was far from over. She turned back to Tahani. Why are you helping us? For the first time since she had met him, his expression shifted. Just barely, just enough for her to catch it. A flicker of something buried deep, something old. Because once I did not. His words hung between them, weighted with something she did not yet understand. Sarah did not press further. She had spent too many years asking for explanations that never came, clinging to the hope that knowing why would change anything. Instead, she stood a little straighter. What now? Tahani exhaled slowly, looking once more toward the horizon. Now you learn how to fight. Sarah hesitated. She had never held a gun until tonight, had never raised her fists in anger. But she had also never been left for dead before. Never been hunted. She thought of Paul, of the men who would return for her, of the life that grew within her, helpless and unseen. Her fingers curled at her sides. Then teach me. Tahani nodded once, satisfied. And so, as the sun rose over the canyon, Sarah Callahan took her first step into the world that had never once been made for her, into a life where she would no longer beg for survival. She would take it. The sun beat down upon the canyon, casting long, jagged shadows across the rocky terrain. Sarah's muscles burned as she lifted the rifle, her fingers slick with sweat. Tahani stood beside her, arms crossed, watching with an unreadable expression. Ethan sat nearby, drawing figures in the dust with a stick, humming softly to himself. The peaceful illusion did not fool her. Beneath the quiet lay tension, a coiled readiness for whatever storm would come next. She had been training for days, though the concept of time had begun to blur. Each sunrise brought new lessons: how to track, how to move without sound, how to fight when running was no longer an option. The rifle was heavier than she remembered, its weight a constant reminder of the world she now lived in. She took a breath, squared her shoulders, and aimed at the small wooden post Tahani had set up in the distance. Her pulse hammered as she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. She missed. Again. Sarah exhaled sharply, lowering the gun. Frustration curled hot in her chest, but she forced it down. She had no room for weakness. Tahani studied her, his expression as impassive as always. Your hands are too stiff. She scowled. I'm holding a rifle, not baking bread. His lips twitched, a hint of amusement gone before she could be sure she had seen it. He stepped closer, adjusting the rifle in her grip. Do not fight the weapon. Breathe with it. Sarah clenched her jaw. That's easy for you to say. Then stop talking, he replied evenly. She bit back a retort, set her stance, and took another shot. This time, the bullet struck the post, not dead center, but close enough that she allowed herself the smallest flicker of pride. Ethan clapped, his face lighting up. Mama hit it. Tahani nodded. Better. Before she could celebrate further, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Sarah's body tensed as she turned, spotting a figure at the canyon's edge. Kale. She had met him once before when Tahani had brought them into the Navajo encampment, a quiet, well-guarded place nestled between the cliffs. It had been the first time in weeks that she had slept without fear of something creeping toward them in the night. But not everyone had welcomed them. Kale was tall and broad, his dark eyes filled with barely restrained contempt. He had not spoken much to her, but when he had, it had been with thinly veiled hostility. Now he approached with deliberate slowness, his gaze locked onto Tahani. A white woman with a gun, he murmured. Should we be concerned? Sarah stiffened. Tahani remained still. She learns to defend herself. Kale's gaze flicked to her, sharp as a knife's edge. What does she defend against? Us. Sarah met his stare, unwilling to look away. I defend my son. Kale studied her for a long moment, then turned his attention back to Tahani. Chief, Nez wishes to speak with you. Tahani gave a single nod. Kale lingered a second longer, then turned and strode back toward the canyon path. Sarah exhaled slowly. He doesn't trust me. Tahani's silence was answer enough. She wiped the sweat from her brow, exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She had known the acceptance of the tribe would not come easily, and yet their temporary shelter had been a blessing, one she could not take for granted. Ethan tugged at her sleeve. "Are we in trouble?" She forced a smile, smoothing his hair. "Not today." But she could feel the weight of something shifting, pressing down like an oncoming storm. Tahani led them back to the encampment as the afternoon light began to wane. The scent of smoke and roasting meat drifted through the air, mingling with the earth's dry warmth. Children ran between the huts, their laughter momentarily easing the heaviness in Sarah's chest. But the moment they entered the heart of the village, the eyes of its people turned toward her, some filled with curiosity, others with suspicion. Chief Nez sat outside his hut, a man of many winters, whose gaze held the weight of knowledge Sarah could not begin to comprehend. Kayleigh stood beside him, arms crossed, waiting. Tahani stepped forward and spoke in a quiet, measured tone. Sarah understood none of it, but she could feel the meaning behind the words. A conversation about trust, about belonging. Chief Nez listened, his expression unreadable, before his gaze settled on Sarah. He spoke, his voice rough but calm. Tahani translated. "He wishes to know what you will do when your enemies come for you." The question sent a chill through her. She knew Paul Callahan would not let her escape so easily. He had left her for dead, but she had survived, and men like him did not let go of things they considered theirs. She met the chief's gaze. "I will fight." Tahani translated, and something flickered in Nez's eyes, approval, perhaps, or something close to it. He nodded, speaking once more. Tahani turned back to her. "You may stay, but you must prove your worth." Sarah nodded. "I understand." Kayleigh scoffed, but said nothing. The following days passed in a blur of labor and preparation. Sarah helped where she could, learning their ways, watching the women weave and cook, gathering herbs as they instructed. It was strange, being given purpose again. She did not miss the way Kayleigh watched her, waiting for her to fail. But she did not fail. Still, unease clung to her, a feeling she could not shake. It was the sense of being watched, of something lurking just beyond sight. That night, as the village settled into quiet, Sarah sat outside her hut, Ethan asleep beside her. Tahani approached, his shadow stretching long in the firelight. "You do not sleep," he observed. Sarah traced a pattern in the dirt with her fingertips. "I can't shake the feeling that something's coming." Tahani was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Because it is." The words sent a chill through her. Before she could ask what he meant, the sound of distant hooves shattered the quiet. A single rider, emerging from the dark, galloping toward the village at full speed. Sarah rose, her heart pounding as the man shouted words she did not understand. Tahani's face hardened. He turned to her. "They have found you." The words settled like stone in her gut. She turned, rushing into the hut, gathering Ethan into her arms. Outside, the village erupted into motion, warriors grabbing their weapons, preparing for the worst. Sarah stepped into the firelight, rifle clutched tight, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts. Then, across the darkened plain, she saw them. Paul Callahan and his men. Their torches burned against the night, the fire reflecting in their cold, merciless eyes. Sarah's grip on the rifle tightened. She was not the same woman who had been left for dead. She would not be taken again. And as Paul rode closer, she knew there would be blood in the dust before the night was through. The night pulsed with tension, the air thick with the scent of burning torches and the sweat of men eager for blood. Sarah stood at the edge of the Navajo encampment, rifle clutched tight in her hands. Ethan pressed close behind her. Paul Callahan and his men loomed in the darkness beyond the firelight, their horses snorting, their eyes gleaming with something cruel and hungry. Paul tilted his head, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. "Well, look at this. Thought we left you for dead, Sarah." His gaze swept over the encampment, taking in the warriors flanking her, the flickering flames casting jagged shadows across their painted faces. "Seems you found yourself some new friends. But we both know you don't belong here." Sarah's stomach twisted with rage, but she kept her voice steady. "You lost the right to say where I belong the day you left me and Ethan to die." Paul chuckled low and mean. "Don't be foolish now. I ain't here to argue. I'm here to take back what's mine." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "I was never yours." His smirk vanished, his hand dropping to his revolver. "Not you." The boy. Fear lashed through her, hot and blinding. She took a step back, shielding Ethan with her body. "Over my dead body. That can be arranged." Before the words had fully left his lips, a gunshot cracked the air. Sarah flinched, heart hammering. But the bullet wasn't meant for her. A sharp yelp sounded from one of Paul's men as he tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. Tahani stood a few paces ahead of her, rifle smoking, eyes hard as flint. "You are not welcome here," he said, voice low and steady. Paul scowled. "Ain't your fight, savage?" Tahani didn't blink. "It is now." Paul's fingers twitched toward his gun, but the Navajo warriors had already drawn their bows, arrows poised to let fly. For a tense moment, no one moved. The night held its breath. Then Paul sneered. "Fine. If you want to fight, we'll give you one." The world erupted. Gunfire split the air, torches flung to the ground as men leapt from their saddles, rushing forward with pistols and knives. The warriors met them head-on, arrows loosed in deadly precision, war cries splitting the night. Sarah barely had time to react before a man lunged toward her, his blade glinting. She jerked the rifle up, barely catching the blow. The impact sent her staggering, pain jolting up her arms. The man sneered, shoving her back, but she twisted, raising the butt of the rifle and slamming it into his temple. He crumpled to the ground. Her breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't like hunting, like target practice. This was chaos, brutal and wild. Ethan cowered behind a wagon, his tiny hands over his ears. Another attacker charged at her. This time, she didn't hesitate. She raised the rifle and fired. The bullet hit true, and the man stumbled back, eyes wide with shock before collapsing into the dirt. Something cold settled over her. The realization that she had killed, that this world had no place for hesitation. A blur of movement caught her, Paul, stalking toward Ethan, a knife glinting in his hand. "No," she screamed, breaking into a desperate sprint. Paul yanked Ethan up by his arm, the boy's cry piercing through the noise. "Time to come home, boy," he growled. Sarah's vision tunneled. She fired. The bullet struck Paul in the leg, sending him to his knees. He howled in pain, releasing Ethan. Sarah didn't stop. She lunged, slamming into him, sending them both sprawling into the dirt. Paul twisted beneath her, flipping her onto her back, his hands closing around her throat. "Should have died when I left you," he snarled. Spots danced in her vision. She thrashed, clawing at his face, his grip tightening. Then, suddenly, he jerked back, a sharp gasp escaping his lips. Tahani stood behind him, bloodied knife in hand. Paul's eyes went wide as he slumped forward, lifeless. The fight had ended. The remaining Callahan men, seeing their leader dead and the warriors still standing strong, turned and fled into the darkness. Silence fell over the battlefield. Sarah coughed, gasping for air. Ethan ran to her, burying his face in her chest, sobbing. She wrapped her arms around him, pressing her forehead to his. "It's over," she whispered. "It's over." Tahani knelt beside her, offering his hand. She took it, allowing him to pull her to her feet. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. She had survived. She had fought. And she had won. Days passed, and the land seemed to breathe again. The bodies were buried, the wounds tended. The Callahan threat was no more. Sarah stood on a ridge overlooking the valley, Ethan playing with the other children below. The bruises had begun to fade, but the weight of everything still clung to her. Tahani approached, standing beside her. "You have a choice," he said quietly. She nodded. She knew. The world beyond this valley would always be dangerous. The settlements would always see her as something broken, something unfit for survival. But here, in this place, she had learned to fight. She had learned to live. She turned to him, a slow smile spreading across her lips. "I already made it." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sarah Callahan stepped forward, not as a widow, not as a lost settler, but as a woman reborn in fire, standing on the edge of a new beginning. The wind whispered through the Wyoming plains, rustling the brittle grass as dusk settled over the land. The sky stretched vast and endless, painted in streaks of dying sunlight that melted into the encroaching darkness. Nancy Conway wiped her brow with the back of her hand, exhaustion settling deep into her bones. The day had been long, filled with the grueling labor of maintaining a homestead alone, but she had little choice. If she didn't work, she didn't eat. Samuel laughed as he ran past her, kicking up dust in his wake. His scrawny frame barely made an imprint in the dirt, but his energy was boundless. At only 10 years old, he still carried a child's unbreakable optimism, unaware of the harshness that lurked just beyond the horizon. Nancy watched him with a tired smile, allowing herself a rare moment of warmth. "Did you see that, Nan?" he called, holding up a rabbit he'd snared. His blue eyes gleamed with pride. "You're getting faster," she praised, ruffling his dusty hair. "That'll make a good stew tonight." Their world was small, their cabin standing alone against the wilderness, but it had been enough. Nancy had built something here, clawing her way through grief after her husband, Eli, died in a hunting accident the year prior. She had never expected to be a widow at 24, left with only her younger brother to care for. She had fought to survive, to keep their land, their home. And she had been winning, until now. The first sign was the silence. Nancy's heart tightened as an eerie stillness settled over the plains. The usual chorus of evening sounds, chirping crickets, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, vanished, replaced by something far more unsettling. Absolute quiet. The kind of quiet that made her skin prickle. Samuel noticed it too. His small hands clutched the rabbit tighter, his grin faltering. "Nan." She held up a hand, signaling him to stay put. Her gaze swept the horizon, her pulse quickening. Then she heard it, the distant thunder of hooves. A sinking dread gripped her. She knew what that meant. Inside. Now. Samuel didn't hesitate. He ran toward the cabin as she followed, her heart hammering against her ribs. She barely had time to slam the door shut before the riders appeared. 5 of them, their silhouettes dark against the dimming sky. Outlaws. They rode in like wraiths, moving with a practiced ease that sent a shiver down her spine. The leader, a hulking figure with a jagged scar across his cheek, reined in his horse and dismounted with slow, deliberate movements. His boots crunched against the dirt as he strode forward, stopping just shy of the porch. "Evenin', ma'am," he drawled, his voice thick with false politeness. Nancy tightened her grip on the rifle she had grabbed the moment she'd heard the hooves. "You need to leave." The outlaw smirked, his teeth yellowed beneath his scruffy beard. "Now, that ain't very hospitable. We're just passing through." "Liar," she spat. "You wouldn't stop at a lonely homestead unless you meant to take something." His grin widened. "Smart girl." The next few moments blurred. A sharp bang rang out gunfire. Nancy flinched as wood splintered near her shoulder. Samuel screamed. The outlaws surged forward. The cabin door burst open under their weight, and suddenly they were inside. Nancy fired, her shot wild, missing its mark. The leader knocked the rifle from her hands with a brutal swing, sending it clattering to the floor. Pain exploded through her wrist. She lashed out, kicking, clawing, biting, anything to make them let her go. But it was futile. One of them grabbed her, yanking her arms behind her back. She struggled, but their grip was unyielding. Samuel was screaming her name, trying to fight them off with his tiny fists. It was like watching a sparrow try to take down a wolf. "Get off me," Nancy snarled, twisting in their hold. "Feisty," the outlaw chuckled. "I like that." Terror coursed through her veins. Then Samuel lunged. He swung the rusty old knife he'd grabbed from the table, slashing wildly. The outlaw nearest to him cursed as the blade nicked his arm. A mistake. The gunshot was deafening. For a moment, the world stilled. Samuel stood frozen, his hands clutching his stomach, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. His lips parted in shock, but no sound came. Nancy screamed. She tore free with a strength she didn't know she had, collapsing to the floor just as Samuel crumpled beside her. Blood seeped into the cracks of the wooden planks. His small fingers twitched, reaching for her. And then, tears blurred her vision. I'm here. I'm here, Sammy. Stay with me. But his eyes, so full of life minutes ago, were already fading. A rough hand yanked her up by the hair. No time for crying, sweetheart. We gotta move. She fought like a wild animal, but grief had weakened her, stealing the last of her strength. Samuel was gone. Her home was burning. The outlaws were taking her, dragging her into the night. The sky above remained indifferent, the stars watching as if nothing had changed. But for Nancy Conway, everything had. Nancy drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain in her limbs a dull throb beneath the weight of exhaustion. The world around her was a haze of shifting shadows and the rhythmic sway of movement. The scent of sweat, blood, and damp earth filled her nostrils, mingling with the acrid tang of gunpowder still clinging to her torn dress. The outlaws had bound her wrists with coarse rope, the fibers biting into her skin. Her throat ached from screaming, but her voice had long since failed her. They rode hard through the night, their laughter low and guttural, like the growl of wolves circling wounded prey. She kept her gaze lowered, her mind refusing to accept what had happened. Samuel's face, pale and still, haunted the edges of her vision, and she swallowed back the sob threatening to break her. This was not the time for mourning. She had to think. She had to survive. The leader, the one with the scarred face, glanced at her, his eyes gleaming in the dim moonlight. You keep quiet, and maybe we'll find a use for you, he muttered. Her stomach twisted. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms to keep herself from reacting. Every instinct told her to fight, to scream, to do something. But what good would it do? She was outnumbered, outmatched, and unarmed. The only thing keeping her alive was their amusement, and that would run dry soon enough. The hours dragged on, the landscape shifting from open plains to thick forests, where the trees pressed close, their branches clawing at the sky. The air grew colder, and her body shivered despite the lingering heat of the outlaws' campfires. She needed a chance, any chance, to escape, but she had none. It happened fast. One moment, the outlaws were laughing, their guard down as they rode deeper into the trees. The next, there was a sharp whistle, a sound barely distinguishable from the wind. Then, the first man fell. An arrow jutted from his throat, his body hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. The others barely had time to react before more arrows sliced through the air, striking with deadly precision. Horses reared, men cursed, the night erupted into chaos. Nancy twisted in her bindings, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had no idea who was attacking, but she knew one thing. Whoever they were, they weren't the outlaws. Gunfire cracked, but the attackers moved like ghosts, slipping through the darkness with ease. A second outlaw slumped forward in his saddle, an arrow buried deep in his chest. The leader, Scarface, roared in fury. It's an ambush. Ride. Nancy felt herself being yanked roughly as her captor spurred his horse forward, but before they could escape, a figure emerged from the trees. A warrior. His face was painted, dark streaks running down his sharp features. His long, black hair was braided, beads glinting in the dim light. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace, his bow already drawn. His eyes locked onto hers for the briefest moment before his arrow flew, striking the outlaw who held her captive. Nancy hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. She gasped, rolling onto her side as the battle raged around her. The remaining outlaws scattered, their numbers dwindling under the precise assault. Scarface turned his horse, cursing as he disappeared into the night. Silence fell. Nancy lay still, waiting, barely daring to breathe. Her body ached, her wrists raw from the rope. Slowly, she turned her head. The warrior was standing over her, his bow lowered. He was taller than she expected, his build lean but strong. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes held something she couldn't quite place. He knelt beside her, reaching for the rope around her wrists. She flinched, instinct taking over. "Stay back," she rasped, her voice hoarse. He didn't react, only pulled a knife from his belt. The blade flashed briefly before slicing cleanly through her bindings. The rope fell away, leaving behind deep red welts on her skin. She flexed her fingers, the pain sharp but bearable. "You are safe," he said, his voice low measured. His English was accented but clear. She swallowed, her throat dry. Who are you?" He considered her for a moment before responding. "Tushunka." The name meant nothing to her, but the way he carried himself, the way the other warriors deferred to him, told her he was someone of importance. She pushed herself up, her muscles protesting. The forest was eerily quiet now. The bodies of her captors sprawled across the earth. The warriors moved swiftly, gathering weapons, checking their fallen. Tushunka stood and offered his hand. She hesitated. Trusting a stranger was dangerous. Trusting a Cheyenne warrior, when she had spent her entire life hearing stories of raids and massacres, was unthinkable. But he had saved her. And right now, he was the only thing standing between her and death. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, steady. He pulled her to her feet with effortless strength. She swayed, dizzy from exhaustion and shock, but he caught her elbow, keeping her steady. "You need rest," he said. She wanted to argue, to demand answers, to run. But her body had other ideas. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the flicker of firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. She woke to the scent of smoke and the distant sound of voices speaking in a language she did not understand. Blinking, she sat up, her head throbbing. She was wrapped in a thick blanket, her dress still torn and dirty, but no longer damp with sweat and blood. A small fire crackled nearby, casting shadows against the towering trees. Tushunka was sitting across from her, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate movements. He glanced up, meeting her gaze. "You are awake." She swallowed, her throat still raw. "Where am I?" "Safe," he said simply. Her fingers curled into the blanket, her mind racing. "Why did you help me?" He set the knife down, studying her. "You were a prisoner." "So." She exhaled sharply. "People like you hate people like me. And I was raised to fear you." He didn't react, merely tilted his head slightly. "You were raised with stories. Stories are not always truth." She opened her mouth to argue, but found she had no strength for it. Instead, she dropped her gaze to her hands, the bruises stark against her pale skin. Samuel was dead. Her home was gone. Everything she had fought for, everything she had clung to, was ash. A lump formed in her throat. She closed her eyes, willing the grief away. After a long silence, Tushunka spoke again. "You cannot go back." Her eyes snapped open. "What?" "The men who took you, they will return. Others will come. You are not safe there." She wanted to argue, to insist she could rebuild, but deep down, she knew he was right. She had nothing left, nowhere to go. A long breath escaped her lips, shaky and uncertain. "Then what do I do?" Tushunka's gaze held steady. "You come with me." The words sent a shiver through her. Go with him? A Cheyenne warrior? Into a world she did not know, with people who were supposed to be her enemies? But the alternative was worse. She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes with a quiet resolve. "All right," she whispered. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, as Nancy followed Tushunka through the wilderness. Every step she took sent a dull ache through her sore limbs, but she refused to complain. She had learned quickly that weakness had no place in this world. The path ahead was uncertain, the weight of her grief pressing heavily upon her shoulders. But she had chosen this, chosen survival. There was no turning back. Tushunka moved ahead of her, his strides purposeful, his presence as solid as the land itself. He barely spoke, only gesturing when necessary. It should have unnerved her, the silence between them, but somehow it didn't. There was a strange comfort in it, an understanding that words were not always needed. He had saved her life, and for now that was enough. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She had been raised to fear men like him, taught that their ways were savage, that their hearts held no mercy. Yet he had shown her kindness, given her warmth when the world had left her cold. She didn't know what to make of him, of the way he seemed to carry the weight of something unseen, just as she did. They walked for hours, winding through dense forests and across narrow streams, the land growing wilder with each passing mile. Tushunka moved with an ease that she envied, his steps sure, his hand steady. He knew this world in a way she never could, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly small. At midday, they stopped near a stream. Tushunka knelt beside the water, cupping his hands and drinking deeply. Nancy hesitated before doing the same, the cold liquid shocking her parched throat. The silence stretched between them until finally she spoke. "How far are we going?" Her voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. Tushunka glanced at her, considering. "Far from where they will look." She frowned, brushing a strand of loose hair from her face. And then he met her gaze, his dark eyes unreadable. "Then you decide." It was an answer and not an answer, leaving her unsettled. She wanted certainty, a plan, something to hold on to, but the wilderness did not offer such comforts. They moved on, the terrain growing rougher as they climbed into the hills. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, and exhaustion began to creep in. Her body screamed for rest, but she bit her tongue, unwilling to show weakness. When they finally stopped for the night, she sank onto the ground, her legs trembling beneath her. Tushunka set about building a small fire, his movements swift and practiced. She watched him, fascinated despite herself. He wasted nothing, every motion deliberate, every choice precise. "You've done this before," she murmured. He looked up, a flicker of amusement in his gaze. "Many times." She hugged her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. "I haven't." "I know." He said it without judgment, but it still stung. Of course, he knew. She was nothing but a settler woman, raised on plowed fields and wooden walls. Out here, she was as helpless as a newborn. Frustration burned in her chest. "I don't want to be useless," she admitted, surprising herself. Tushunka tilted his head, studying her. Then, without a word, he handed her a knife. She blinked at it. "What?" "Skin it." She looked down and realized he had dropped a freshly killed rabbit in front of her. Its glassy eyes stared up at her, lifeless and still. Her stomach twisted. "I don't," she started. He raised a brow. "You want to learn." She swallowed hard. He was right. If she was going to survive, she had to stop waiting for others to save her. Gritting her teeth, she took the knife. Her hand shook, but she did as he showed her, cutting with slow, deliberate movements. The work was messy, clumsy, but she forced herself through it. By the time she was done, her hands were sticky with blood and her stomach churned. But she had done it. Tushunka nodded approvingly. "You will learn." She met his gaze, something shifting between them. He was not offering pity. He was offering respect. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the smallest spark of pride. They ate in quiet companionship, the fire casting flickering shadows against the trees. The meat was gamey, rough on her tongue, but it filled the emptiness inside her. She chewed slowly, stealing glances at Tushunka as he ate with calm efficiency. Finally, she asked, "Why did you help me?" Tushunka was silent for a moment before answering. "Because they would have killed you." She frowned. "That's not much of a reason." His gaze flickered to the fire. "A long time ago, men like them killed someone I loved. I could not stop it. But I could stop this." Something in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. It was the same pain she carried, the same hollow ache of loss. She had thought she was alone in it, but here, in the stillness of the wild, she realized she was not. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Tushunka did not look at her, but he gave a small nod, as if acknowledging something neither of them had spoken aloud. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Nancy found herself studying him, the sharp angles of his face, the way the firelight danced in his dark eyes. He was unlike any man she had ever known, calm, measured, unshaken. She expected to feel fear. Instead, she felt safe. It unsettled her. As the fire burned low, exhaustion pulled at her limbs. She curled up beneath the blanket he had given her, her body aching, her mind racing. "Sleep," Tushunka said softly. She wanted to argue, to insist she wasn't tired, but her body betrayed her. Her eyes drifted shut, And for the first time since the night her world had been torn apart, she slept without nightmares. The next day, the lessons continued. Tushunka showed her how to move through the woods without making noise, how to read the tracks left behind by animals, how to tell which plants were safe to eat. She stumbled, failed, cursed under her breath, but he remained patient. And slowly, she began to change. She no longer flinched at the weight of a blade in her hand. Her steps grew surer, her body stronger. The woman who had once been dragged away, helpless and broken, was disappearing. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone who could survive. Tushunka watched her with quiet approval, never praising her outright, but never doubting her either. She found herself drawn to him, not just for his skill, but for the way he carried himself, with quiet strength, with a steady calm that made the world feel a little less uncertain. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "Where will you go?" Tushunka looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Where I am needed." She studied him, something inside her twisting. "And if you weren't needed?" He was silent for a long time before answering. "Then I would find a place." Nancy hesitated, her heart pounding. And could that place be with someone? His gaze met hers, the firelight flickering between them. Something unspoken passed between them, something fragile yet undeniable. Tushunka did not answer, but he did not look away. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She did not know what the future held, did not know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time, she did not fear it. She had survived. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was not meant to survive alone. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth as Nancy rode beside Tushunka, the rhythmic thud of hooves against the forest floor blending with the distant call of a hawk overhead. The sky above them was vast, an endless stretch of blue that made the world feel limitless. The wilderness had changed her. Gone was the fragile, grief-stricken woman who had been dragged from her burning home. In her place was someone sharper, leaner, and hardened by fire. She had learned to read the land, to hear the warning of distant rustling in the brush, to trust her instincts, as if they were an extension of her body. But nothing had prepared her for this. Tushunka rode ahead, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. He had always been a man of few words, but tonight, silence carried a different weight. They had tracked the movement of Scarface and the remnants of his gang for days, and now they were close. Too close. A heavy feeling settled in Nancy's chest, an ache that had nothing to do with exhaustion. The past had caught up to them. It had always been heading this way. A reckoning. Tushunka pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge overlooking a valley. Below, the flickering light of a campfire cut through the shadows. Nancy could make out 3 figures hunched around it. Scarface's men. Her fingers curled around the hilt of the knife at her hip. The thought of facing them again sent a thrill of fear through her, but beneath it, something else, something colder. Revenge. She dismounted, stepping lightly, her heart a steady drum in her chest. Tushunka watched her, his dark eyes giving nothing away. He had trained her for this moment, not for vengeance, but for survival. Yet now, as she stood beside him, a question hung in the air between them. Would she do what needed to be done? A sharp crack of laughter echoed from the camp below, sending a pulse of anger through her. Scarface. His voice had haunted her nightmares, had lived in the corners of her mind where Samuel's last breath still lingered. Now he was within reach. Tushunka touched her arm, grounding her before she could move. "Breathe," he murmured. "Not for anger, not for hate, for life." Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. She would not let rage guide her hand. They moved as shadows through the trees, their footsteps silent. The fire crackled ahead, its light flickering against the rough faces of the men who had destroyed her world. Scarface sat hunched over, chewing on a strip of dried meat, oblivious to the fate creeping toward him. Tushunka raised his bow. The string pulled taut, the arrow aimed true. But before he could loose it, Nancy stepped forward. "This one is mine," she whispered. He hesitated only for a moment before giving a small nod. Her heart pounded as she crept closer, her breath steady. Scarface turned just as she reached him, his eyes widening in surprise, then narrowing in recognition. "You," he sneered, pushing himself to his feet. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Her grip on the knife tightened. She could hear the others stirring, but Tushunka was already moving, quick and precise, cutting them down before they could react. Scarface grinned, the firelight casting deep shadows across his scarred face. "Gonna try to kill me, little girl?" She didn't answer. She lunged. The blade met flesh, slicing deep into his arm as he snarled in pain. He swung at her, but she was faster now, no longer the terrified woman he had torn from her home. He reached for his gun. She didn't let him. A swift kick sent him staggering back, and in the space of a breath, she was on him, her knife pressing against his throat. He stilled, his breath ragged. "Go on then," he spat. "Do it." Her hands trembled. The moment stretched, heavy and suffocating. She could end it, take from him as he had taken from her. But Tushunka's words echoed in her mind. Not for anger, not for hate, for life. She withdrew the knife. Scarface's sneer returned, but it was cut short as the final arrow found its mark, piercing his chest. His body slumped to the ground, lifeless. Nancy exhaled, her breath shaky, the weight of it all pressing down on her. Tushunka stepped beside her. "You chose," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "I did." They left the camp behind them, the fire smoldering into embers, the ghosts of the past finally silenced. As they rode into the open plains, something shifted between them. The air felt lighter, the road ahead no longer shrouded in shadow. Nancy turned to Tushunka, watching the way the wind played through his dark hair, the quiet strength in his posture. "Where will we go?" she asked. He considered for a moment before answering. "Where the sky is wide and the rivers run free." She smiled, the first real smile in what felt like a lifetime. "That sounds like a place I'd like to see." He reached for her hand, calloused and warm against her own. And together, they rode into the wild.